The health and well-being of every person on the planet is at the mercy of the continued use of fossil fuels. Now, that is the conclusion of a new study that's published and out today in the Lancet. And it's the result of almost 100 experts from 51 institutions around the world. Climate emergency, it says, is worsening worldwide and having a severe impact on our health and our food and our jobs. Abby Kugathasan is here with more on the report. It's meant to be a lead-in into COP27. And Abby, as obviously I was just saying there in introducing you, it is pretty dire in what it is finding.
Absolutely, Heather. The report has concluded that as the climate crisis worsens, so too do the risks of hunger, infectious disease, and heat-related deaths. Extreme heat, like what we saw across Europe this summer, impacts cardiovascular and respiratory diseases. It exacerbates them. About 500 billion hours of work was lost in 2021 globally because of extreme heat. And that mostly impacted agricultural workers in poorer nations, which means the workers made less money and there was less food available for them. The report also says that the climate emergency is worsening the food and energy crisis here as well. I spoke with Tom Evans, who's with a climate think tank, and he says if wealthier countries do more to tackle the climate emergency, they can also address the cost of living crisis they face at home. Let's have a listen.
You know, some of the cheapest forms of energy at the moment are renewable energies, energy efficiency, actually reducing the amount of energy we're using in the first place. That would actually have a material impact in the short term on energy demand, on energy prices. It would address inflation in many of these developed countries, but many governments aren't taking that route.
Now, the richest nations, the G20 countries, produce about 80% of all global emissions. And as we saw over the summer, it's countries like Pakistan who suffer disproportionately. And UNICEF now says children who are the least responsible for climate change are among the most at risk. Their report warns that almost every child on Earth will face the impacts of heat waves, Heather, by 2050.
As I said, it's a pretty grim picture of the future, and it calls, Abby, for change now. So let's talk about the kinds of things it's recommending.
I mean, we've heard from scientists and activists for years and decades, we could say, who've been saying that their governments, particularly Western governments, their response has not been up to par. As of right now, we're not going to meet the goal set out in the landmark 2015 Paris Agreement to limit temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius. We know 1.5 degrees doesn't sound like much, but every fraction of a degree that increases results in tens of millions of people more facing life-threatening conditions. The lack of action by wealthier nations has seen protests. Of course, there's the Fridays for Future campaign led by young people around the world. And this month, we've seen other demonstrators try to grab the headlines and draw attention to the issue as well. 2 protesters with Just Stop Oil threw tomato soup at a Van Gogh painting here in London earlier this month. And just a couple of days ago, 2 people in Germany were arrested for smearing mashed potatoes on a glass-covered Monet. They, of course, want action. The UN Climate Conference is next month in Egypt, and scientists say it's not too late.
Abby, thank you very much. Abby in London this morning.